Sot kam kënaqësinë që t'ju prezantoj tek moduli I dytë, seanca e dytë e modulit të dytë, referentin e parë që do jetë profesor Vis nga Zvicra, I cili do të flasi për cilësinë e menaxhimit të personelit, pra të gazetarëve të redaksisë, si një kusht, le të themi, thelbësor për cilësinë e menaxhimit të medias dhe të redaksisë në parim. Pas zotit Vis, unë do t'jap disa të dhëna, le të themi, empirike nga fusha, se sa të kënaqur janë gazetarët shqiptarë me punën e tyre, pra mbase janë shumë të kënaqur me mënyrën e menaxhimit redaksive aty ku janë dhe s'kemi nevojë fare për asnjë ndryshim, dhe do shpresoj që pastaj kolegët e ftuar, kolegët tanë shumë nderuar, zonja Alba Maltezi dhe zoti Armand Shkullaku, besoj që s'ka nevojë që t'ua prezantoj aq shumë postet, sepse I dini fare mirë se ku ata veprojnë, të cilët do shkëputen pak nga kjo, le të themi, pjesa teorike, që në dy referimet e para mund të jetë pak fare, dhe do të na tregojnë se si në fakt është realiteti I menaxhimit të redaksisë në Shqipëri, në mediat në të cilat ata punojnë dhe njohin nga afër. Sidomos një rol të veçantë ose ajo gjëja që do na interesonte shumë në interesin tuaj është si rekrutohen gazetarët, si funksionon, le të themi, mënyra e menaxhimit të brendshëm, çfarë sillin gazetarët nga jashtë, çfarë I japin, le të themi, menaxherët e lartë nga brenda, e kështu me radhë. Pra jam edhe vetë shumë kurioze të dëgjoj se çfarë do na thonë Alba dhe Armandi sot. Okej, pa humbur kohë, le të fillojmë atëherë me referuesin e parë, me zotin Vincent Vis nga Zvicra, dhe pastaj vazhdojmë me referimet e tjerë.
Thank you very much, Jamila, for this nice introduction. As you heard, I will talk in Swiss English, lingua franca. I will try to speak slowly, so maybe this is better also for Tony. Tony is your translator. When you have any questions, raise your hand, as Jamila said, and we can clear it together with Tony. So I go further. As you heard, I'm coming from Switzerland, from Zurich. I work at the University of Applied Sciences. This is a university where we try to work on the transfer between the academic world and the practitioner world. I myself, I'm a radio journalist. I worked 10 years as a radio journalist, and then I decided to go further in the academic world. And I made my promotion, my thesis, my doctor thesis about this issue, quality management in media organizations. As you can imagine, when I started with this work, 1995, I started and I made my thesis in 2002. When I started with this work, everybody said, "Oh, are you stupid? How can you make research about what is it called? Quality management in journalism? Wow, it doesn't exist." Journalism has something to do with arts. It's not something that you can steer, control. Every day you produce something unique in journalism. So don't talk about quality management. But then I made my dissertation and I had a lot of empirical data. I visited a lot of media companies, and I'm very convinced that it is possible also in this environment to establish something like a quality management system. 10 years later, in Switzerland even, today you don't get a license for a private TV station or for a private radio station if you don't have established a quality management system. Of course, we worked a lot to get to this point, and also in the public broadcaster, it is very important that the public broadcaster can show that there is something like a quality management system. Now I will focus on one aspect, on the personal management. Of course, personal management, HR, human resources, is one important part of the quality management system, and I will focus on this today. And I am sure I talk to you as journalists, and maybe also as journalists who will have a leadership in media companies, maybe now or later, and I'm sure that then you need some tools for personal management, and I try to convince you what I'm talking about here. And the first step, we have to make clear what could it be, this quality management system? What does he think when he is talking about quality management system? So I have a slide to show you what I mean by quality management system, and then afterwards we go further and focus on issues. We focus on the editorial level, on the editorial level of a media company. And on this editorial level, maintaining quality or steering quality, assuring quality, includes all systematically planned procedures. Before you can establish a quality management system in media organizations, you have to define quality goals. And of course, this is a big issue. It's not so easy to define quality in journalism, but of course, when you want to establish something like a quality management system, in a first step, you have to make clear what could this be, quality in journalism. And then quality assurance thereby helps to define also corrective measures to meet the LED standards and to overcome deficits. Well, it's a kind of preventive aspects and also corrective aspects. To develop, steer and ensure quality in media companies, suitable management concepts, of course, are necessary, which develop the corresponding structures and creates internal guidelines. Already now we talked about a lot of aspects of quality management, quality goals, you need guidelines, you need something like a management concept. Actually, that's what I will talk here about. We have three parts, actually only three parts of such a quality assurance system or a quality management system. First part are quality goals, second part processes, and the third part are the personal resources. Let's start with the goals. So three parts. Quality goals or standards, quality standards concerning form and content of the program. You have to define such quality goals first. Of course, when you are an editor-in-chief in a media company, you have to think about how can I manage it to define such quality goals? How can I communicate these goals to my employees? How can I make the employees understandable to check what I mean? That's a big issue. You not only can write down a paper with your quality goals and then think, I have done my job. This is a first very big issue. How can you communicate such quality goals? We will talk about this, and maybe some of you have a lot of experience with that. How can I participate my employees to establish an understanding, a common understanding of quality goals, and how can I communicate it in an ongoing process to my employees? They are to reflect the editorial mandate, of course, and specify the goals and standards of your single organization. These goals and standards are to be included in documents, of course. Of course, everybody of you has some quality goals in his head. As an editor-in-chief and all the people in the editorial board, the journalists have quality goals in their head. They are socialized in the media company, but a first requirement for quality management is that you make it clear and write it down in documents so that you can communicate with these documents. So these goals and standards are to be included in documents such as mission statements, editorial guidelines, or editorial handbooks. I will show you some examples of very famous media companies like New York Times or The Guardian or BBC, of course. They have something like a quality management system, and they have managed it to write down such quality goals in specific documents. What I will tell you here is when you want to establish your media company a quality management system, you also have to do this first step and write down your specific editorial goals. The goals are to be made known among all employees, and as I said, this is already a big issue. How can you make them known of these specific goals? The second part, as I said, define processes which allow for an ongoing control of whether stated quality goals are met. So quality management is an ongoing process, and you have to identify these processes and to define these processes. This includes, for example, briefings. When you talk with your, as a manager or as an editor-in-chief, when you talk with your journalists and you plan a story, actually you need a briefing first. It's an element of quality management. But also production approval processes before you publish your article, for example, you have to control it. That's another aspect or another example. Or institutionalized program feedback. You have to organize these feedback processes, all in relation to these above mentioned goals and standards. I will go into details, of course, also concerning this, what concerns these processes, but this is like an introduction here, quality goals, processes, and we go into details later. Furthermore, the results of these feedbacks, when you establish such feedback processes, is to make accessible for all employees. So when you give feedback to one person, to one journalist in your media company, one element of quality management is also that everybody knows this feedback. Everybody knows the criticism, how you criticize the products in your media company. Let's go to the third element of quality management. Of course, these are the human beings, the personal. Sufficient personal resources are needed to fulfill the editorial mandate. As far as human resources are concerned, I think about training to meet the defined programs, requirements is to be implemented. Training is one very important aspect of personal resources. And then we have performance reviews with employees and written down agreements on goals to be achieved should help to communicate the quality standards. I think in a later presentation we also will talk about this when you, sir, you will talk about recruiting personnel. Yeah. One aspect will be that you make transparent who can work in our company and who is not allowed to work. Why do you decide to hire this person and not another person? You have to make transparent, and when you want to make it transparent, you have to have something like goals, and you communicate these goals. Of course, not every editor-in-chief likes this, because when you can hire people, this is also a question of power. And when you want to have power, you don't like it to make transparent this, because you wanted to be the only one who knows how you recruit these people. But within the quality management system, this is one requirement: you have to make transparent this. This is a very important element. Okay. Now you see a first slide. I try to draw a picture. We have a media company, and I try to show you where do you have all these elements in your media company, these elements of defining goals, processes, and HR management. In the first step, you have to have documents, procedures, quality manuals, or also a functional organization chart. This is a question of planning. We talk here about plan, do, check, act. We call this as a Deming cycle. This is also an element of quality management system. Everything you have to do has to go through this cycle: plan, do, check, act. And when you plan something, for example, who do you hire in your company, then you have to make it transparent in documents. We will talk about these documents later. The aspect of doing is the production process, and the aspect of checking is something like a monitoring system, feedback system, criticizing system, like internal audits, indicators, or non-compliance register or compliance register. This is a question of monitoring, and of course you need also responsibilities of the steering process. Usually this is the task of the editor-in-chief, but in a bigger media company, for example in my country, the public broadcaster, you need also a department of the steering, where you organize quality meetings, and where you define quality goals and talk about steering of this quality process. This is the question of acting, of set standards, of controlling the whole process. And of course also the human HR resource, finance and IT is one aspect, is an important part of the quality management system, but we will talk about the personal management here. We will focus on that. This slide is not my slide. I have stolen it from, maybe you can look it up later, from a so-called Foundation Media and Society organization. This is an organization based in Switzerland, in Geneva. This organization, Media and Society organization, has established a standard for quality management for media companies. That's interesting. That doesn't exist all over the world. Only in Geneva we have such a company, and they try to establish such a standard, and they go into countries of development, for example, and they try to convince the media companies to adopt these standards. It will be interesting to look it up. Media Society organization. You will find a lot of examples there. A lot of what I'm talking about you will find there. So this is a source of my presentation here. When you try to establish something like a quality management system, you have to become aware that you have to go through this cycle: plan, do, check, act, again and again and again. Let's start with the planning process. This is my own model. I created also in my dissertation this model of media quality management, and you will see, to make it easier maybe for you, we are talking about rules. We need rules, quality goals, for example, objectives. On the left side you see the rules. Where can you write down rules? For example, in editorial policy, guidelines. Here you see you need something like an editorial policy. Is there somebody in this room who works in a media company where you have something like editorial guidelines or editorial policy, written down? Raise your hands. Okay, so we start at the very beginning. That's not a problem. I think already this process, when you talk about quality in your media company and you try to make clear what is our understanding of quality, then you made a big step already, I think, in direction of quality management system. Of course you can say, oh bullshit, this is not important, we know it, why should we write it down? Okay, you can work like this, or you can be convinced, as I am, and I have a lot of experience also with a lot of media companies in Switzerland. I'm convinced it can help you in your media organization to go further, to become more professional, when you make clear what your goals are. And you don't talk only about these goals, but you write them down in so-called policies, guidelines, or concepts. I will show you some example for this. And of course you need also your norms. Norms like independence, transparency, objectivity maybe. I'm not a fan of objectivity because I don't believe in objectivity, but maybe in journalism this could be an issue. Ethic codex, or even standards. What is a good article? What are the standards for a good article? Like this, for example. When you want to make an output, this is normal. Everybody says you need relevant information, diversity, accuracy, fairness. Nobody can say something against fairness. Transparency, narrativity, of course, in journalism. You tell stories, of course. But what is narrativity? When do we have a story and when is it not a good story? Or interactivity with social media, for example. This could be such quality standards. You all know these quality standards, of course, but important is that you write them down and that you have a common understanding, for example, of fairness. What means fairness? Everybody with his best argument, and then you make an accusation that the person you make this accusation can say something, something like this. You may have to make this clear, and you have to communicate these goals to the employees. Of course, when you make journalism and use these standards, you hope that on the outcome side, the public will be informed, better understanding, orientation, identification, or participation. So this is the output or outcome. To steer the process in the media company, you need these rules, and let's also talk about the procedures, the processes, the resources. Of course, you need people, money, infrastructure, a lot of knowledge. You also need a kind of organizational structure. Hierarchy? Okay. How do you say it in Albanian? Hierarchy. And of course, processes like preventive processes. I already talked about briefing, set the storyline, planning processes, but also campaigning, coaching, feedback, fact-checking elements, and ex post also feedback, self-criticism, and also audience research you can use. These are all processes you can use as resources in your quality management system. Of course, I can't talk about everything. Everything is very interesting, of course. I already told you that in Switzerland, so we have a new radio and TV law. And I'm convinced that it is a good thing, this radio and TV law. Since 2007, the Ofcom, the regulation authority, gives a broadcasting license to private organizations only when they establish something like a quality management system. Of course, many of you are happy that you don't have such a rule in your country, because this means also a lot of work to establish a quality management system, maybe, and maybe you don't believe that it is very important. But in Switzerland, the government was convinced that it is important, and they said in Switzerland you can only produce programs when you can prove, when you can promise, the first step, that you have something like a quality management, and then we control. We don't control the program. This is a kind of censorship, of course. Of course, we are looking to the program, make our studies, the university do this. But we only want to know, do you have something like a self-control system? And when you can prove that you have a self-control system, then it's okay for us. I think that's okay, that's fair, that's not censorship. So, and we control it every second year. We evaluate, this means control, such a quality management system. I am by myself an evaluator. So I visit every second year private TV stations and radio stations. There are also other competitors, also other evaluators. They go to the organizations and they make a lot of observations and investigations, and then they have to control if there is something like a quality management system. Of course, this is an ongoing process. Now we are in the 10th year. No, not already. 2007 it started. So yes, we count 7th year, yes. But we made a good experience. Of course, at the beginning,
the managers of the media company said, oh my God, this is so stupid. What do we have to do? We don't like it. This is a kind of censorship. So they complained a lot. But now, after 7 years, they are also convinced that it can help themselves. Huh? They become more professional. They have a better feedback culture, for example, in their companies. They know what they are doing. So this can't be wrong, actually. And they say you have the text in the media law is very simple. They have to define quality goals and standards concerning form and content program. That's everything what is written. They have to define production processes, quality control processes, and they have to prove that they have sufficient personnel, also educated personnel, not only personnel that has no education, but it is open what kind of education, not only university education, of course, also practical education. That's also very worthwhile, but they have to prove that they have personnel that has something like an education in journalism, of course. Let's go to the examples. We have these 3 aspects: quality policy, quality goals, procedures, processes, and the personnel. I go through these aspects now, the rest of my time. First requirement, the management should provide evidence of its commitment to well-defined core values. So you can write down this in a quality policy. The quality policy of the management should be formalized in the form of widely disseminated document that is reviewed at least once a year. So you don't write down the quality goals for once and then you have done your job. You have to go through again, next year again, talk about this quality goals. Are these the right quality goals? Does it make sense? Do we have to change something? I can tell you a lot of, not a lot, so some of these media organizations, they called me and asked me as a scientist at the university, could you write us down such a quality management policy? We don't have the time, but we have to make such a, I think they have to do it by themselves. Because it's important that they say, this is our understanding. You can't outsource something like that. Of course, when you pay enough, it's okay. Or we can do it together, of course. No, it's important that you do this with you personal together. Make meetings, discuss a lot of discussion. What are the crucial quality goals in our media company? So that's not a good example. I think you shouldn't outsource this. This document could, for example, include an editorial charter, that's very simple, that guarantees, for example, and now it becomes already difficult, that guarantees the independence of the media organization from any kind of power, be it political, economical, or other. Of course, I know it's not so easy. Also in Switzerland, of course, and we are here in Albania. In Switzerland, you have a lot of, not political power, that's over, but economical power, of course. Media owners, they want to earn money with this media organization. Could also be a spaghetti factory, it doesn't matter, then they own. So, but when they establish such a quality management system, and they have to, because only then they get the license, at least they have to document or you have to write down that independence, editorial independence is guaranteed. So you can understand that for the person, for the journalist in such a media company, it is much more easier to require this independence when there is written down something, as when you only think, yeah, of course, we are independent, but it's not the truth. So this, for example, independence of the media organization is something very, very important. You have to write it down in an editorial charter, for example, or a code of conduct, or a mission statement, an ethical code, or a quality manual includes, for example, professional norms of quality journalism, such as pluralism of opinions, of course, and point of views, consideration for minority groups. Do you also have minority groups in Albania? Okay. No? Or promotion of diversity. Let's look for an example now. the editorial policy of, it's a good example, you can look it up later, for example, the BBC. Why not? Why not? Go to this BBC website, and there you find something like guidelines. Guidelines you see about accuracy, impartiality, and so on. I have made a copy of this. So, you have all these very important issues: fairness, privacy, children and youth people as contributors, and so on. I will focus on this aspect. Of course, it's a lot. You have to organize here, and you have to make clear the rules. But I focus, because of the personal management, for example, on conflicts of interests, and then it can make you clear what I mean. You have to organize it, for example, when one of your journalists is a party member, or he owns something, he owns other companies, and he wants to write about these companies, or somebody owns a newspaper and wants to write in this newspaper. Maybe a conflict, I don't know. So, for example, you have to make clear here, if they have any financial, commercial or business interests, the journalists, which might involve a conflict of interest or might be perceived to involve a conflict of interest, only perceived, they must inform the editor or head of department promptly. If the editor or head of department considers that there could be a real or perceived conflict of interest, they should deploy another person on the story or content. Editorial policy may also be consulted. So you have to organize this, you have to have rules for this. Of course, you can see we can have rules on the paper, but the reality is totally different. Yes, I know this, of course. But it makes it easier. When you have a conflict and you can show, hey, why do we have this paper when reality is totally different? This is an act of schizophrenia, and it's not good to be schizophrenic, or hypocrisy. It's not good. It's not good for an organization. The good instrument would be an ombudsman. Do you know ombudsman? Ombudsman. This is also part of a quality management system, of course. You have the editor-in-chief or the management, and you have a conflict between. You go to the chief and say, hey, my colleague is writing about this story, but he has interest in this story. That's not good. And then the editor-in-chief says, hey, let me in peace, that's not your business. Then you had to have an ombudsman. An ombudsman, also every private and public, of course, radio and TV station in Switzerland has an ombudsman. So you can say it's easier in Switzerland because the law requires that every radio and TV station, not the press is very free there, but also a lot of media companies, media companies, they have ombudsman because it's good. It's media governance. It's better when you can say, this is our ombudsman. When you don't have an ombudsman, you have a bad image. And maybe this is not good in the long run. So the most of these media companies have established it, and in the private and public radio and TV sector, they have to. It's the rule, it's the law that you establish such. But that's not the most important thing. I think you have to start in your media company and to get to define such rules, and then you can start there. Don't say, oh, okay, forget about it, we don't have an ombudsman, so we don't have to talk about quality image management. That's not the only thing. So, another example for guidelines, for example, the Guardian. You see the address here, theguardian.com. The Guardian makes transparent own guidelines. You can look it up later from A to Z. For everything you have a style book. I have an example here. For example, gender issues. Why not? Why not? You have to have rules. How do we cover gender in our media company? I can understand this is not the main problem in Albania, maybe. I don't know. But I think it's a very important issue. And we are talking about such things in Switzerland. For example, you can say, never say his to cover men and women, use his or her. So we have two gender in reality. That's an example. Avoid terms as businessman or housewives, male nurse, woman driver, woman lady doctor, and so on. If you need to use an adjective, it is female and not woman in such a phrase as female bishops, female MPs, female president. So that's only an example. Maybe it goes too far for you. It's not your main problem, but you also could have guidelines for something like this. Or concepts, editorial concepts. Unfortunately, I only have this in German here. It's an example of the public broadcaster. Every program has a known mandate. They write down the goals of this program. It looks like this here. You find in this mandate the USP, the unique selling proposition. What is unique in our program? How do we differ from other programs? You may have to make this clear for this program. You have information like this, sinus milieu. Do you know this? Did you see this already? When you define your target group, what is our public? What is our audience? Are these people more traditional or are they more progressive? You have to make it transparent and communicate it to your employees and also communicate it to the broader public. So on the level of every single program, not the whole program, every single program part, you have to establish such mandates. Why not? You can start with this. Statutes, this is very important, statutes for personal management. I have also an example for this. You find it, for example, in the checklist for editorial independence for the public broadcasters. That's a good example in broadcasting. This is a website of the International Federation of Journalists. Please look it up. You have very good examples here how you can guarantee independence, editorial independence. And my example focus on the statutes. There is written this in the statutes, minimum standards for editorial statutes. The statute is also a paper where you regulate how you behave with each another. You can read it here. For example, they write down the editorial staff represents the moral and intellectual capital of the public service broadcasting station. So that's a big word. Moral and intellectual capital. So it's important. You have to take care of this person. The appointment and dismissal of the editor-in-chief or equivalent by management must be confirmed by the editorial staff by majority of vote. So it's a kind of democracy within the media company. This is the understanding of independence, that also your staff members, they can decide something. The editorial staff must be consulted on decisions which affect definition of editorial policy and content of the broadcasting station. And this is one of the main sentences. The editorial staff has the right to participate with management in the joint development or editorial codes and guidelines. So when you establish something like an editorial charter or guidelines, they have to participate, of course. It's not only a question of the management. It's a question of the whole company, of the whole organization. You have to have such democratic rules. So they have to participate. Ethic codex. Another example. I found the code of ethics of Albania. Maybe I'm the only one. Do you know it? Of course. Okay. So you have also most of the countries have something like this. You have, and I think it's important that also in your quality management system you refer on this ethical codex. You don't have to invent your new norms. They are there. You have such norms of independence, how to treat children, for example, everything like this. please go to this website of, where do you find it, of the press council. Do you have a press council? Yes?
The Media Institute.
Okay, Media Institute. And study this. You can use these codes of conduct as rules of your own media company. Okay, also in the New York Times would be an example. You find, for example, the handbook of quality management of the New York Times. You see it's called Ethical Journalism. You have a lot of guidelines here how to behave. I make it very short. For example, also this personal relations with sources, you have to make clear what are the rights of this personal. For example, yet staff members, especially those assigned to beats, must be sensitive that personal relationship with news source can erode into favoritism, in fact, of appearance, and so on. So we have a lot of good examples. Of course, also in Switzerland, this is a kind of theory, if you want. It's a model, and when we made a lot of research about this. Only the public broadcaster, this should be green here, has something like such. The majority of the journalists who work in the public broadcaster say, yes, we have the quality policy, 75%, or an ethic codex, 66%, or something like PR guidelines. But when you go, for example, to online branches, we have a more bad picture. For example, only 37% have something like a quality policy. So there is also a lot of work to do in Switzerland. Not every media company has it, and not everybody in the companies know that they have it. Maybe they have it, but they don't know it, and that's also possible. So let's go to the resources. The second point. The management should identify and document all the processes having a direct impact on the quality of editorial content, the relationship with advertisers, the relationship with external suppliers of content, the measurement of audience figures and listeners or viewer satisfaction, and the management of human resources. The organization should have clear rules of recruitment, we will talk about this, clear rules of recruitment and professional development options for all its employees. You also have to make transparent these standards, these rules. The organization should, this is also a requirement, should establish an in-house criticism system, or a content evaluation commission, and put in place a quality or ethics committee, a mediation mechanism. You see, you have the ombudsman here. So it's also on the process, a process issue, to deal with external complaints. So when we talk about this, okay, I can end here then. The human resource aspects are these. For example, and you can make the test now. Do you have this? And when maybe it inspires you, it's interesting. An annual evaluation of the performance of each employee, evaluation of employee satisfaction. You have to ask your staff if they are satisfied with the work. That's quality management system. You have to ask them every year, how can we, when it is the moral and intellectual treasure of the company, you have to ask them. Periodic goals, individual goals, setting for each employee. You have to talk every year with your employee and ask them, what is your personal goal? Are you the right person for this job? You can't do this only with your head. You have to write down what the goal is. Job descriptions, of course, for all positions. Clear and transparent procedures to appointment and resignation of employee. Clear and communicated rules for salary. Why not? Make transparent your salary system and professional evaluation. Assessments of training needs. You have to ask your personal what are the training needs for each employee. Specific policy and appropriate budget for ongoing training. So these are very important aspects, I think, for the human resource management as a part of such a quality management. Of course, you can't talk about job description or personal goals when he didn't have defined the quality goals of your company. This has to go together. So the first step is define quality goals for the company. The second step, define personal goals. This is a question of a system. I sent Jonila a document of this Foundation for Media and Society, and there you can find a guidelines for a so-called ISIS standard. I hope you will ask her if you can get this document. It's a long document with a lot of good examples. I come to the end slowly. With a lot of good examples, for example, for how to define information quality, ethics, independence, relationship with advertisers, transparency, and also you see human resource management. And I pick out some points of this human resource management. In this document you find a lot of best practices. What does the New York Times, what do the little companies, a lot of links and examples how you could make transparent your own system. And I show you now some principles of human HR system that is written down in this document. For example, there is written, it is an essential to have a transparent and coherent HR policy. All employees, including freelancers, temporary staff and media stars, also the stars, should have written procedures of recruitment, training and evaluation regarding contracting conditions of media stars. Transparency is recommended. You have some examples here. You can take it as a checklist. Do we have this? Does it make sense? Is it important? For example, concerning the recruitment, we will hear what you say. For example, open competition. When you have a new job, when you hire new people, it should be an open competition. Everybody should apply for this job. Participation of immediate superiors and the HR specialists. Clear evaluation processes for all applications. Job descriptions for all positions. Welcoming program for all new employees. And kind of standards for the performance evaluation. How do you evaluate the performance of the single journalist? And also the rest, you can find everything here. For example, training, how can you help the people in the media company to get the training that they need. You also find a checklist with questions. When you go through this checklist, you get the good feeling, do I have something like a quality management system concerning this personal management? Come to the end with this slide here, my last slide. Actually, every day you have to solve this problem. It's in German. One colleague asked the other, what do you think? What do you think about my article? Do you think it's a good article? Please be honest. And the other says, oh, wouldn't it be better to stay friends? So he can't be honest. It's so difficult. You know this. Of course, I also as a radio journalist. But when you have a clear idea of quality, when you have documents also, when you have written down what the job description is, what the quality criteria are for a good article, then it becomes easier. So I would say when you have a quality management system, it is easier to talk, to have a feedback culture, and who can have something against the feedback culture in your company. So please think about it. Some elements make sense, maybe not everything, but to improve such a situation, to become more professional in the feedback system, in the criticism, you need something like a quality management system. That's what I have to tell you. I hope that you will remember some points also tomorrow. Okay, thank you.